Hello students, welcome to La Excellence. Welcome to our 22nd weekly magazine where we'll be covering from 23rd July to 29th July 2017. Here, I just want to tell you people from now on, we will be going in detail about the background information of that particular issue and also try to explain some of the basics. The main reason for this is most of the students who are watching this are freshers. So they need some basic understanding of this. So because of which people who are watching or who are already experienced in this field, you just have to have some patience whenever I'll be telling some basics which you already are aware of. Else you can also revise along with this, right? So whenever I take any issue, I'll be telling a background information. If it is, for example, with respect to ordinance, I'll tell you what is the circumstance under which it will be used by the president and what are the benefits of it, what are the negatives of it. So for a person who has already prepared for this exam, ordinance is a very simple issue. But for those who have just started, for them, we have to go in detail and explain them about this. Because of this, I will be spending some time in explaining the basics. So just please bear with me. Okay, so let's quickly begin with what are the important issues. So the first topic is actually with respect to Supreme Court for panels to examine dowry cases. As you're all aware, in 1983, the Indian government had actually introduced a dowry law which actually aimed at helping the innocent women who were actually being tortured and who were forced to commit suicide in few cases. Here, let us link this with women issues in social issues. Here, when we talk about social issues, I have already told you that we have to look at three major issues, that is caste, religion and gender. Whenever we are talking about gender, one of the most important aspect of gender is that the role of family in actually changing the mindset of the woman, or at the same time we have to look at the role of society. Here we are seeing some of the basic problems a woman will face inside the family, that is dowry, a social evil. But here, we are not actually discussing about the impact of the Dowry Act that is being passed on women, but we are seeing what is the impact of this on the family if that particular act is being misused by the woman. Supreme Court earlier had actually given that it is a non-bailable offence, where if the woman goes and complains against the family, it is mandatory for the family to be arrested. It was used as a tool by the woman to act against the family members. As the number of misuse cases were noticed, the Supreme Court has recently told that until and unless you prove that the person is guilty, you cannot arrest them. For this, they have actually told that there should be family welfare committees at every district. It should have 3 people. It can be from anyone from social sectors, NGOs and others. Based on this committee's recommendation, action should be taken against this. But the fear is the genuine cases which actually goes to these courts can be manipulated by the people who have money, and they may put unwanted pressure on the families. Yes, there is misuse of the law. When there is misuse of the law, when you allow the person to escape because there is misuse of the law, then the law itself will not be helpful in empowerment of the woman. So here, the Supreme Court has to ensure that yes, at one point, it has to make sure that false cases are not being brought, but at the same time, women should also be safe under these circumstances because the family may use its money power or political power to put unwanted pressure. Who are these family welfare committees is not clear. They are saying that wives of the people who are working, women organizations, you never know whether these people are non-corrupt, whether they have the morals and values to sit there, whether they will apply their own morals there. All this comes into picture. For example, if I'm talking about marital rape, different people have different opinions about it. So as the society is not yet matured, and when you have not trained the people, and if you allow them to judge on a particular issue, then all the social biasness about that particular society will be imposed on the woman again. Let me just take a simple scenario where a woman who is working at night came home late, and because of this there was a quarrel where the family went to an extent of harming the woman. When she goes and complains against this, and the family welfare committees, if it feels that yes, woman cannot work out late night, it is wrong, then the entire concept of the societal progress and bringing about women empowerment in the society will be lost again, as we are building institutions which does not help women to progress. So even though Supreme Court has said, Supreme Court has just given this, it should be the procedure. Once it is established, let us see actually how these things function. And at that point of time, we will be in a position to criticize or applaud the act of this carefully, right? So let's quickly move to next topic. The next important issue is actually with respect to social boycott. Even in ethics and other subjects, we always used to talk about imposing social boycott on all those people who do not follow the norms of the society, especially when it comes to implementation of some of the social programs like Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. So one of the measure written by some of the students are where if a family is not following these norms, or if they are not going to construct their own toilets, and if they are going in open defecation, then there should be social boycott, was what some of the basic measures which students used to write. But now you have to be very careful when you talk about such measures, because it is believed that who actually boycotts this? These are panchayats which run on their own. In most of the societies, it is not the traditional panchayats who actually win the elections and tell what needs to be done. But there are panchayats based on the caste hierarchies as well. And usually the upper caste people get the power, and the boycott will be usually on the lower caste or women. Because of this boycott, they usually face lot of problems, and we have also seen entire families committing suicides. When you go to places like Bihar, Maharashtra, where the caste system is rigid, there we can actually see that even if there is an inter-caste marriage, where the so-called upper caste guy has married the lower caste girl, there are incidences that the family is made to parade naked in the entire street, especially those who are belonging to the lower caste. And there are instances where these families have committed suicide. So Maharashtra government has actually said that these social boycotts are criminal offense, and this has to be punished with 3 years of imprisonment or a fine of 1 lakh rupees or both. So here it's important for us to look at this issue carefully. The next important issue that we have to look at is ordinances, which should be used as a last resort. And this was said by none other than Pranab Mukherjee in his farewell address. So what exactly are we talking about? Ordinances are also similar to the acts passed by the parliament, but this does not has the parliament approval. You all are aware that parliament has to meet thrice in a year. At least they should meet with a gap within a gap of 6 months. So usually parliament meets thrice in a year. Whenever parliament is in session, that is when both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha is functioning, at that point of time, if any law has to be passed by the government, then it has to take permission from the parliament. Sometimes there will be emergency, and at that point of time, usually parliament permission cannot be taken. At that point of time, usually governments go for ordinances. This is a special power given in the constitution to the executive to bypass the parliament only for a certain period of time. But once the parliament comes back in session, if an ordinance is passed by the president, then it has to be introduced in the parliament. And the parliament may either accept it or reject it, or it may also amend it. But unfortunately, governments are scared of the upper houses, especially Rajya Sabha, when they do not have the required numbers. And whenever they don't have the numbers, the problem is they actually go for ordinances and they never introduce it. In one of the current affairs session, I had already told that in Bihar, there is a case where more than 10 times an ordinance has been repromulgated. The meaning of this is, let me take ordinance has been started now when the parliament is not in session. Now, after 3 months, parliament came to session and I am not introducing it in the parliament. Again, once the parliament is dissolved, as I have not introduced, I'll go to the president and tell him, please pass this ordinance again, as I have not got permission from the parliament. This is called as repromulgation. And Article 123 and 213 with respect to central government and state governments usually work on the ordinances. It is believed that whenever the governments go for ordinances, they want to bypass it. And the basic structure of the constitution is that executive has to be under the control of judiciary and it has to be under the control of legislature. So accountability is very, very important. Executive has to be accountable to legislature and legislature has to be accountable to judiciary. Now this basic structure of accountability is being bypassed by the executive by misusing the ordinances. This is not only the problem of the present government, you should not be confused, it is problem of almost all the governments. So President Pranab Mukherjee has actually talked about this ordinances. The next issue is important from mains, where they are talking about the privacy in the public domain. Earlier, whenever we used to talk about the relationship between the government and the people, the suspicion with respect to government interfering into the internal matters or the private space of the persons were limited. But today, with computerization, digitalization, where there is access to private information of the individual, there is a fear that this may not be present or this may not be used only by the government, but it may be used by others as well. I'll just give you a simple example. Most of you might be using smartphones, right? When we are using smartphones and if your bank account is actually linked with these smartphones, it is believed that whenever you download an app, you can actually see a message coming up, popping up, which says that allow this app to read messages, right? So whenever you say allow, whenever you get a message or whenever there is transaction from your bank account, you get a message. And this message is actually read by the app. and then the app decides whether you are in a position to purchase that particular product or not. And on the basis of that, they will actually give you a call and sell their products, or that particular advertisement will be shown to you. Now here, if multinational companies are using it for marketing purposes, it's fine. But if the same information goes to some private individual and he wants to question you, and if he wants to criticize you, or if he wants to trouble you on the basis of your economic strata, then this becomes an important issue. So today we are talking about our private details being present in the public domain, and how far should we be in a position to give every information of ours to the public. So here it is very important for us to look into this issue, where we want you to look privacy as a debate and information with respect to privacy now. Over a period of time, when we take up several issues like Aadhaar and all, which keeps repeating, at that time I will be giving you a linkage between Aadhaar and privacy, and also once we get questions about the right to privacy, I'll be taking Article 21 and explaining you about that in detail as well. The next issue is actually with respect to parliamentary secretaries. What exactly does this mean? Governments can actually appoint a few people as parliamentary secretaries to actually help the ministers. Now, as the number of MLAs or MPs who can become ministers is being reduced to 10% or 15% by the constitution, so to appease these people, what the government is doing, they are actually appointing few MLAs as parliamentary secretaries who are also having some powers. Now, whenever they go for these appointments, now they will be getting salaries as parliamentary secretaries, and they will be getting salaries as MLAs as well. One, you are having two offices. Second important thing is, whenever they function as parliamentary secretaries, then they will be functioning under the government intentions. And whenever you work as an MLA, then your work will be different. So here, the work of an MLA will be overlapped by the work of the parliamentary secretary. So Constitution does not allow this overlapping. We call this office of profit, where they get two salaries as well. Supreme Court has actually rejected this. Especially the Assam government wanted to appoint some 13 MLAs as parliamentary secretaries. Aam Aadmi Party had actually appointed 21 MLAs as parliamentary secretaries. And if it goes against this, then these people will be actually dismissed. They will lose their elections. So it's very important for you all to remember that parliamentary secretaries are considered as office of profit. That is, the MLAs will be earning twice, the government will be paying them twice, and they cannot function both roles simultaneously, as both becomes conflict of interest to the MLAs. The next issue is actually with respect to abortion bill. Recently, there is debate in the country about the government's interference in abortion. Earlier, it is believed that till 20 weeks, if a woman goes to abortion on her own, then there is no problem. But once it crosses 20 weeks, then it is mandatory for them to get permission from the government or the courts. The main reason for this was, usually female feticide used to happen only after 20 weeks. And for that, the Supreme Court had actually said that you have to take permission from a medical council, which says that if they do not go for abortion at this stage, either the threat will be for the woman or for the child. Until and unless this is done, you cannot go for abortion, was what the courts used to say. But now the debate is that child rape survivors, they don't know till 20 weeks that they are pregnant. At that point of time, it will be unnecessary burden on them to go to courts and take permission from the courts for abortion. WHO says that this law will neither prevent the rising population nor it will reduce abortion. And whenever such things comes to notice, then usually the children are prone to some type of unsafe abortions. So you can see that some medicines will be given, traditional medicines will be given. In rural areas, there will be few people who actually make them consume some things which will lead to abortion. These are all unsafe abortion practices. And this will have huge impact on the health of the child as well. So here, the debate is whether government has to interfere or government should not. But here, we should also be aware that in few cases, government intervention is very, very essential. And the reason for this is female feticide will not be removed completely until and unless you are not focusing on these people and pressurizing them to go for medical counsel or courts. So here the conflict again is whether you want to fight for female feticide or you want to fight for the rights of the child who with their innocence was being treated badly by the society and they have put them under this. Here, my take will be to simplify the procedure but at least ensure that female feticide cases comes in front of the courts so that the family who wants to remove the female child will be afraid of the law and will not go for this. The next issue that we have to see is actually with respect to a case where a 38-year-old woman who was actually suffering from cerebral palsy was actually subjected to rape, and when she went to courts, the conditions under which she was questioned was not in accordance with her mental conditions. Her mother went to the courts to ask that as she is suffering from cerebral palsy, she should be treated as a child. But the Supreme Court has said that it is very difficult to apply the conditions of POSCO, that is Provisions of the Protection of Child from Sexual Offences Act, to other people who are suffering from cerebral palsy. Here, the court says it is very difficult to say what is the mental condition of these people. But at the same time, here the issue is, can we subject the lady who is suffering from this to those conditions because she is already suffering from the problems of the society, right? So these are aberrations or exceptions within the cases, and whenever they come to courts, we just need to stick to the Supreme Court judgments. And even UPSC try to avoid these because it is not a rule across. It is only in few cases that exceptions are required. But whenever you talk about mental health care or whenever you talk about some sort of treatment or equality, inclusive laws that has to be made, we have to consider these as well. The next important issue is actually from economy, where we have to read about the payment banks, especially which help the informal sector. Banks have some basic functions. That is, if you go to SBI, what all can you do? You can go deposit, you can withdraw, correct? you can ask for loan, you can take debit card, you can also take credit card. Some insurance facilities are also being given. You can go for DDs, you can issue checks. All these are mandatory when you call something to be a universal bank. But there are differentiated banks, that is, there are other banks, you call them banks, but their functions are usually different. For example, let me take non-banking financial corporations. Why we say non-banking here? You public cannot go and deposit or withdraw money. It is usually used only to lend money to the companies which are at loss, or it may be helpful to give money to agriculture sector. So usually you use certain banks for refinancing. When we say refinancing, what is the meaning of this? Banks has given loans to construction sector or education sector or health sector, and they are not in a position to get money back. At that point of time, there will be another company set up or another bank set up which will give money to these banks to again finance to these sectors. For example, most of the students are not willing to pay loans, or there is delay in payment of loans. So at that point of time, banks will say that if I give so much money to these people, then I may not earn money on time and it's problematic for me. Then what the central government will do, they will open another banking corporation with a corpus of 100 or 200 crores. And this will actually give some money to every bank whichever has given money to the education sector. Here we call this refinancing of the banks, right? Similarly, when we take post offices are also considered as banks. Unfortunately, in post offices, you cannot issue checks to other banks. It is not universal. Loans cannot be given by the post offices. So not all the measures that a normal bank will do will be done by this. So whenever you say that a new bank has come up, please try to see what are the functions of these banks. Here we are actually talking about the payment banks. What is the meaning of payment banks? The meaning of payment banks is that here it will actually accept the deposits and it will allow withdrawals. It will give debit cards, but it will not give credit cards because these payment banks are not authorized to give loans. So informally, wherever you have construction laborers and all, these payment banks will be usually set up where people can come, deposit money up to 1 lakh and withdraw money. So only for this particular purpose, the payment banks are usually allowed. So it's mandatory for us to understand these differences. UPSC usually will ask you about the payment banks, what is the role of this and what are the benefits of this. At that point of time, you should be aware that don't say that it will give loan to rural areas. It will help in giving loan to education sectors, women, SHG linkages. People without knowing the crux of the issue, they just keep using this example continuously in their answers. So that needs to be avoided. How? Just try to ensure that whenever you're going through these payment banks, you are actually saying that it is focusing only on depositing and withdrawing, and only up to a limit of 1 lakh, right? Just go through these payment banks. Airtel payment banks is there. You can go and talk to them once. What are all allowed? How exactly you have to deposit the money, withdraw the money, all this. So that will give you an open exposure to these payment banks. There is an international commission which actually aims at adopting norms for the food products. For example, if some food product is produced in India, and if it has to be sold in Indian market, then you have to go by the food standards of India. But when you are going globally, then there is a committee by name CAC. So this committee actually looks into the products whether the product is packaged in a proper manner, whether this is safe for consumer. So these international standards will only help a product to be sold effectively in almost all the countries. The reason for this is European Union food standards will be different from US food standards, and it will be different from African food standards. So usually companies, they are not aware what is the standard. So now what Indian government has done, it has helped the spices to get this Codex norms so that Indian products, especially spices, can be easily sold in the international market, as the exporters have to follow these norms specifically so that our products are not said to be bad outside. So there won't be any problem with our products and it will be easily acceptable by others. You see the marks, right? ISI marks and all, to talk about the standards. So here we are actually talking about Codex Alimentarius Commission, which actually gives Codex Alimentarius, that is food code, which is a collection of standards and guidelines which actually helps in universalizing the food standards, which will help the product to be sold successfully in almost all the countries. You might have actually read about some protests against regional groupings in Hyderabad. And when we actually question what exactly is the problem, we have to go back to the basics, where we need to understand about one of the most important regional organization, that is Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. A group of 16 countries, which is actually proposed by ASEAN, wanted to bring some free trade agreement similar to European Union. They wanted to counter Trans-Pacific Partnership, which lost its relevance after Trump withdrew United States from Trans-Pacific Partnership. So now, to understand the basics, RCEP is a regional comprehensive economic partnership which actually focuses on the free trade agreement. And this free trade agreement that I am talking about is with respect to 16 countries. Here you must be aware that ASEAN has 10 countries, and ASEAN has 3 important free trade agreement countries, that is China, Japan and South Korea. Along with this, there are 3 more countries, that is India, Australia, New Zealand. These 16 countries want to establish something called as RCEP, and it started in November 2012, but the dialogue is still going on. Here we are actually talking about a modern, comprehensive, high quality economic partnership. Rather than having with individual countries, we will be having with 16 countries at a time, which will actually benefit all the countries. But always remember, when India will be benefited from these countries, those countries will also be benefited from India. So sometimes it will be win-win situation where India will be benefited and they will be benefited. But in some cases, it may be zero-sum where India will be benefited and those countries may not be benefited. Especially when it comes to one of the major factor, that is manufacturing. You're all aware that India is not very good in manufacturing. But when it comes to these 16 countries, 15 countries, they are very good in manufacturing. And in those manufacturing sectors, they are actually moving towards computerization, and the complexity of this has increased. And services is required for these manufacturing sectors. India is very good in services. So because India is very good in services, India will be benefited from this. When we are talking about 16 countries, including India and China, which has the highest populations, we are talking about 3.5 billion people. And we are talking about 40% of world GDP and 30% of global trade. All this with just 16 countries coming together to do trade. Now, India has free trade agreements with Japan. India has free trade agreements with few ASEAN countries. But when we go for one regional agreement, then the benefit is that we need not worry about overlapping, right? With every country you go and talk. But here you will have a comprehensive agreement which everyone will agree. But as I told you, there are certain negatives as well, which has led to huge protests. So let us see what are these. India's manufacturing, as I told you, is weaker. Now with this free trade agreement, if we go for Make in India programs and rural development programs where rural industries has to be set up, those products has not yet come to the market, and when we open our market to these products, one of the basic problem is that India will be flooded with products from these countries and our companies will not be in a position to compete with them. Then our Make in India initiative will not be successful. Second, India is good in pharmacies and healthcare and others. It will also be affected because of this. The plantation sector will be most affected as India has to go for reducing tariff cuts. That is, India already grows certain crops, rubber and other things. Now when we purchase, when we open our market, if we need access to their market, they also need access to our market, and this would lead to cutting taxes by around 80 to 90%. And whenever taxes are cut by 80 to 90%, then this will have huge impact on our people, right? Second, dairy. New Zealand is very good. Australia and New Zealand is very good in dairy industries, and India's edge may be threatened because of this. India is good internally, but our products are not sold externally much, and India has to open up its market for these dairy products as well. And as I have already told you, industry, especially Make in India and others, will be most affected. Then we need to talk about e-commerce. Alibaba and others may come into the market, and Indian companies which are actually working may not be effective. And most importantly, you should be aware that the Alibaba and other companies may be using products from small scale industries of their country, not from India. So at that point of time, most of the products which are actually purchased online will be Chinese products rather than Indian manufactured. So the edge for the companies to invest in India and manufacture in India will be reduced. Minerals and raw materials, India will be exporting, and we know that India is one of the major exporter of raw materials. RCEP is actually asking India to remove these export restrictions, which will actually lead to export of more raw materials out of the country. So at that point of time, we will not have control over our own goods. And at last, it talks about dispute settlement. The meaning of dispute settlement is that investor can actually take the country to courts. For example, let me take a particular company was invested or interested to come to India and invest. Due to environmental issues or due to some land acquisition problem, India or state government of India is not in a position to allocate the land. At that point of time, the company has to waste time. Company would have taken some money from the banks to invest. Company is at loss. It is wasting its time here. It is paying interest unnecessarily. And at last the government will say that we are extremely sorry, our tribal culture is very, very important, so we cannot allow you to come. When this happens, the company will have loss. At that time, countries want the companies to go to courts and file case against those governments. Now, if this is allowed, then India has lot of red tapeism, and lot of measures of the Indian government are actually problematic to these companies. And whenever they go back on any reason, then Indian government has to pay. and India will be liable. This is one of the major problems. India is very good in patentships where our patency laws are considered to be pro-poor. But the RCEP is actually demanding the patent laws to be changed, which will be beneficial to the corporates, not to the people. If that happens, health sector and others will be affected. That is what we were talking in the beginning. So these are very, very essential for us to understand. I'll be taking RCEP separately, where I'll be talking about all the regional organizations and give you a brief understanding of how effectively these work. But I'm just waiting for these agreements to finalize. Then the government of India has actually launched India Quack and Sagar Vani apps. These mobile apps will give information to the people about the earthquakes and also about whatever is happening in the oceans, climate, weather changes, anything happening in the oceans. So with this information, people may act quickly. So you just need to know India Quack is with respect to earthquakes. In disaster management, you can use this. Sagar Vani app will actually help the public to work. But we should also ensure that these apps are working effectively not only on the smartphones, but they are working on other mobiles as well. Then at last, one of the most important thing that we need to focus is the next level of innovation when it comes to fuels. We have seen coal, we have seen petrol, natural gas, shale gas. Now China has come up with something called as inflammable ice or flammable ice. Here you have methane hydrate. Methane is actually compressed under low temperature by water, and whenever you put high pressure or temperature on it, then methane and water get separated and it is actually available for burning, or it is available as fuel. Whenever this fuel is actually available, this is considered as the next generation fuel, and it is mostly present in the South China Sea. So China will be benefited. But one of the major problem with this is methyl hydrate can actually act as a bomb. When excessive pressure while drilling or something happens, then it may act as a dynamite and blast. Second important thing is it is not present at one place like petrol or gas, but it is spread across. So whether it is commercially available or not is difficult to know. As of now, you should be aware that flammable ice, whatever we are talking, is actually with respect to methane hydrate. If you can know this, it is more than enough. At last, ethics questions, please try to answer it, right? For those people who need magazine, you can actually visit loix.in/test-prep or messages at, right? Thank you guys. Thanks for watching.